Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Van Mall, host of I Survived. If you enjoy I Survived, we are excited to announce a new launch. Starting November 15th, we'll be reposting our classic episodes from Season 1 of I Survived. We hope to reach a whole new audience with these important stories of survival. And for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, we think these powerful episodes warrant another listen. Starting November 15th, look out for those episodes and more news from I Survived.
If you like small-town mystery, crazy news, and wild history, then the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast is for you. Each week, Josh Mills and Wayne McCarty bring you the absolute best Florida has to offer. So if you're looking for a show that's safe for the family, but funny enough to help you escape everyday life, then listen to the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast. That's Florida Men, plural, on Florida Man podcast.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our look at the trial of Ralph Stokes. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my very professional co-host, Alice.
Brett, I'm quite literally wearing a suit coat on my knees, though, because my legs are cold. So that's like the opposite of professional, but want to talk about why it's professional today?
You are wearing a suit coat, so that's professional.
Okay. It's not that professional because those are real bongos. That Brett, I need to remove these bongos before the end of the episode. This is like, you guys thought the sea shanties were pervasive in our sea episodes, but these bongos are going to make an appearance not because they had anything to do with Ralph Stokes or this trial or murder, but because we are recording from a studio for the very first time.
It's crazy. Alice is in the same room as me and everything, which is going to be a problem.
Brett cannot stop laughing.
I can't stop laughing. Those of you who remember our Mary Celeste episode, that was the last time Alice and I recorded in the same room because we basically spent the whole time giggling.
And that was, 2 years ago?
That was a long time ago.
That was at least a year and a half ago.
We learned our lesson. But we had an opportunity to record in a studio. We were in West Palm Beach, enjoying the sun. And Podcast One, who is our wonderful network, has a studio down here. So we said, hey, we never recorded in a studio. Let's record in a studio. And they have bongos. So
I think there's going to be some podcaster who will never listen to our podcast, but who actually uses those bongos, Brett. Yeah. And they're going to be like, you touched my bongos.
I promise I'm not going to use bongos the whole time. Because once again, whenever you're talking about murder and everything, bongos are probably inappropriate. Yes. Someone will write a review and say it was inappropriate if you used bongos on a true crime podcast, because you have to be sad all the time on true crime podcast. You cannot have any fun. You can never laugh. If you do that, you're being disrespectful. That's what I've learned. to the process of doing this podcast.
I almost just choked because I was trying to keep in my laughter while you said that.
There you go.
All to say is, if we sound particularly giddy this episode, it's because it's so fun to be in studio and to see each other's faces as we talk about a very serious case.
I know. There is a poor podcast engineer who's having to sit here while just imagine if you were this guy.
He's like,
great.
This isn't funny at all. Why are we having to listen to this?
But he's doing this. So this will either be the best episode ever or the worst.
It's going to be the best because...
And if it's the worst, it's totally our fault.
It's our fault. 100% our fault. I will say, though, we are in West Palm Beach, and by the time you guys hear this episode, we'll have gone home for a long time. But we are meeting up with some fans tonight, which is going to be so fun, or the start of a new true crime podcast. So please don't
if we
hurt
end
us
up
tonight.
murdered, I want someone to do a podcast about our murder.
Yes, how it started in studio with bongos and ended horribly.
Yes.
Maybe with bongos tonight. Who knows?
Who knows? This could be the beginning of somebody's career. So watch out for that if we don't come back. And if we don't come back, enjoy this last episode of The Prosecutors. Okay, Alice.
Okay,
I think we've talked enough.
We've talked enough. Okay, guys. Thank you for joining us for this third episode of Ralph Stokes. We have talked a lot, but we are just in the midst of trial, and we're still covering the prosecution's case and their big witnesses. We covered several of them last time, but a huge witness for the government was Donald Jackson. Now, Ralph's supposed accomplice, remember, Jackson was something of a career criminal. He'd committed a number of crimes, including robbery and various firearm offenses. Now, this was in stark contrast to Ralph, who had never been in trouble with the police. Jackson claimed that Ralph, told him he knew that they could rob Smokin' Joe's and get a few $1,000s. Jackson went with him, and after letting a cop who was loitering leave the area so that the coast was clear, they went in through the back door of Smokin' Joe's. Jackson put the cooks in the freezer at this point, while Ralph, remember, who had worked at Smokin' Joe's, went to find Mary. Now, when Jackson went into the office, he saw that Mary was actually opening the safe for Ralph. He was also surprised to see that Ralph had his ski mask up. It was no longer covering his face. Now, Jackson grabbed Ralph's arm and pulled him out of the room when he saw this. Ralph said that she knew him, she being Mary, and Jackson said, "Yeah, I guess so, because you got your mask up." And that's when he pulled the mask down. So they're having this conversation. Jackson, the kind of career criminal, is like, "What are you doing, man? You don't pull your mask aside so that we have witnesses who can identify you." Now, it's interesting that Mary does not seem to have told the other people at the robbery that Ralph had his mask up and she saw his face. She just had that statement that we now know of, "I can't believe Ralph would do this."
And as we're going to go through, there are various reasons given for why Mary recognized Ralph. Some of them had to do with, it's possible she recognized his eyes. Mills said something similar at one point. Or that she recognized his voice. But you would think if she saw his face clear as day, that would have been the reason that she would have given, if she gave a reason at all. It's interesting to me that there are sort of differing stories about how she knew it was him, which seems to say that she gave some indication about how she knew it was him. And you would think if she did that, she would say, "He pulled his mask up, I saw his face." This is, there's a couple things about this. Number one, it kind of makes sense to me that if you're Ralph and you've never committed a crime, you want to commit a crime, you want to make a few $1,000s, you find the guy you know who knows how to do it. You don't know what you're doing, really. You need someone to help you. You're going to find Donald Jackson. It's often said that Ralph and Donald Jackson were not close. They weren't good friends. I think that's probably true. But nevertheless, he knew about Jackson. And Jackson was in the neighborhood, and he knew this was the guy who could help him out. So it's not that surprising to me that he would go to him. The mask up thing is kind of inexplicable. This is obviously very valuable for the prosecution to have Jackson say this because it definitively confirms that Mary would have known it was Ralph. It takes away any doubt. If she did it based on his eyes or his voice or whatever, it takes that doubt away. But it also feels kind of unbelievable. It kind of feels unbelievable that you would walk in to rob a place, possibly kill some people, and pull your mask up. Ralph is not a professional criminal, so maybe Ralph just made a mistake. But
But you would imagine that unusual. If he'd never worn a ski mask to rob a place, which he hasn't as far as we know, there would have been some discussion like, hey, you should cover up your face. There'd be a reason for why they wore the clothes that they did, because it's not normal to be wearing a ski mask in the middle of the day at this time. And so you would think at least there was some thought when he was pulling the mask over his face. The reason I'm doing this is to obscure my features so the people I worked with can't easily identify me. And it would be strange that when he's in close proximity with the person who would most be able to identify him, he pulls it up to reveal his face.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of an example of doing something like this. I'm sure people have some. I'd love to hear them. Where you're supposed to be wearing something for some reason, and for whatever reason you don't. I'm reminded of, there's a meme that's a guy at a football game, and he's got his hands up over his eyes to shield his eyes from the sun, but he also has a baseball cap on backwards, and his sunglasses are sitting on top of his head. And it's like, if only he had something to shield his eyes from the sun. I'm kind of reminded of that, but I don't know. It seems a little unusual to me, and it's really important that you believe everything Jackson said. Jackson needs to be credible to you, because if Jackson is not credible, then a huge chunk of the prosecution's case falls away. If Jackson is lying, which is the defense's entire theory of the case, then that's going to create reasonable doubt for you. So if this is something that doesn't ring true, and we talk about this a lot, and people always get irritated when we talk about our personal experiences and what we would do and what we think is normal. That is what you do when you're on a jury. You put people on a jury who are normal people who've lived normal lives with normal experiences, and they are listening to people tell them a story. And what is important is this consistent with what you would expect to hear in everyday life? And if it's not, that's going to make you doubt that person.
And note one other thing. Very interestingly, this whole testimony is coming through a firsthand experience conversation that Jackson has with Ralph. It is not secondhand. Rather, he's putting himself in the center of this conversation, which gets around hearsay problems. Now, you're thinking, okay, well, this conversation did happen out of court. But remember, the two people part of the conversation are Jackson, who's taking the stand, and also Ralph, who is the party opponent. So when the party opponent, we've talked about this, says something out of court, their statements can be brought in, because we don't expect the person that is being prosecuted to come in and say, oh, yep, I definitely said that incriminating thing here. We just assume that what they're saying, if it's against their interest, it's going to ring more true than not. So that's an exception to hearsay. So note that that exception is here, and it's very convenient that the prosecution doesn't have to do any finagling to get this testimony in. They just get to put Jackson up there because Jackson says, this is a conversation I had with Ralph.
And it's a really good point. Anything a defendant says is never hearsay, so you don't have to worry about that. And hearsay is such an obstacle in trial. It's one of the things that makes trial so difficult. So any statements from the defendant are gold. And when you have a co-conspirator like this, this is exactly what you want. And, the prosecution probably worked with Jackson a lot. You'll hear that, the prosecutors, they massaged his testimony. They got him to say all the right things. Yeah, they probably did. And to a certain extent, that is perfectly fine. You can't make people lie, and you can't tell them what to say, but you can go through someone's testimony with them and hear what they have to say and talk about it. That probably happened to the extent that, look, with Jackson, there may have been things the prosecution did that are problematic. We're going to talk about that. With Jackson knows where his bread is buttered. He wants to not get the death penalty. He is attempting to avoid that. So I don't think you had to coach Jackson all that much. I think Jackson was always going to say it was Ralph, and Ralph did all this. Well, at this point, they put Mary in the freezer, and Ralph is freaking out. And he tells Jackson they're going to have to kill all the witnesses, which is a pretty extreme thing for someone who's never committed a crime to say. To go from, I've never committed a crime, to I want to rob a place, to we now have to kill 4 people. But that's what Jackson says he says. Now, Jackson, he had spent some time in prison himself, and he told Ralph, look, right now, we're on the hook for a robbery, and that's it. It will make it much worse if you start killing people. Then we're going to be on the hook for murder. And Ralph seemed to get that. He seemed to agree. And so Jackson thinks, okay, we're good. We're not going to have to worry about this.
Can we also talk about how we're talking about such an inexperienced criminal who somehow pulls the mask up over his face to reveal his entire face, and this bumbling, robber is the one to suggest killing 4 people. Again, this is what the jury's hearing, and this is what they have to parse through in order to decide whether they can believe Jackson's testimony. But just keep that in mind. These are logical questions that the jury would have in their mind.
So Jackson, he ends up putting the lock on the freezer where they've put everybody in. He doesn't snap it. And he had actually asked Ralph beforehand, or he said he did, how long someone could last in the freezer, because he wanted to make sure, I guess, they weren't going to freeze to death while they waited on somebody to show up. Ralph thought that they could last a couple days. And, you know, Jackson says he wasn't sure they could last a couple days, but he didn't think they were going to have to wait that long anyway, so it was fine. And this is an interesting little detail because it's one that the prosecution brings out because they want to explain that it was Ralph and not Jackson who knew how things worked at Smokin' Joe's. And this is another example, we've talked about this a lot, of demonstrating for the jury that there has to be an inside man. There has to be somebody on the inside who knows exactly how everything runs, who's helping Jackson, who obviously doesn't. Jackson has no connection to Smokin' Joe's whatsoever. Helps him sort of understand things. And that's one of the things they say. Now, look, in reality, 2 random robbers could have gone in, put them in the freezer because that's what worked, and not really worried about how cold they were going to get. But it is something the prosecution points out. And
also, you can note that if your biggest witness is a career criminal, there are a lot of things you have to deal with, right? Not only credibility, but likability. Like, why would we like someone who commits crimes for a living? This is a way to humanize him, right? To be like, he didn't want to hurt anybody. He even thought ahead of the crime, you know, how not to harm anybody just to get, you know, a couple $1,000s and leave. So this is, whether it's true or not, this may have been as innocuous as trying to humanize and make Jackson likable to the jury.
Prosecution continues by talking about all the other things that Jackson would not have known, that he would not have known where the safe was. And they ask him all these questions. And of course he says, I don't know anything about this, which is what he's going to say. But nevertheless, he doesn't know where the safe is. He doesn't know the hours of the restaurant. He's never been to the restaurant. He has no idea how many people are going to be there. All that information that leads you to think this is an inside job. And Ralph is obviously the inside. So they've got him in the freezer. Everything's fine. They got the money. They're getting ready to leave when the mailman shows up. The worst possible time to deliver the mail is at this moment. So Jackson says he tried to play this off. He pulls off his mask. He goes to the door. He opens the door. He greets the mailman. He takes the mail just like normal day. I'm just getting the mail. He shuts the door, and the mailman starts to walk away. Ralph, however, he's already been freaking out. He's freaked out even more by this. The mailman has now seen Jackson's face, and he thinks this is going to be a problem. So he actually opens the door, and he orders the mailman at gunpoint back inside. At this point, Ralph is supposed to put the mailman, and this is a little confusing. The timeline of exactly how this part goes down is a little confusing, so this is sort of the best you can determine from both Jackson's testimony, the testimony of Mills, where everybody was found. In any event, Jackson says Ralph's putting the guy in the freezer. He's supposed to put him in the freezer. And Jackson is now going to check to see if there's anyone else outside, any other potential bystanders who could get in the way of their getaway. And if there's not, now they're going to leave. It's at this point when he's looking outside that he hears gunshots. He runs over to the freezer. He sees Ralph shooting into the freezer. He grabs him and pulls him away. At this point, the mailman makes a break for it. Ralph goes after the mailman, and Jackson ran for his car. He hears more gunshots as he starts the car, and Jackson is done with this whole thing. He's getting out of there. Ralph can find his own way home. But at that moment, Ralph comes running out of the restaurant so fast that he actually runs into the side of the door and falls down. That's the way Jackson describes it, which is one of those details that is so specific that it lends credibility to the whole story. It has the ring of truth to it. He jumps in the car. They drive off. Jackson is furious with Ralph. He's yelling at him that was the stupidest thing he could have done. He was a damn fool. There's a lot of other expletives that fly out. And when Ralph says that he killed the mailman too, Jackson's even angrier because he says him now, it's not just going to be the local Philly bumbling idiot detectives who are going to be looking for us. Now the feds are going to be looking for us too. Which, Jackson's a pretty sophisticated robber because he totally gets this.
Okay, so everything we've heard so far, this is just, it sounds like it's out of a movie. There's literally, cars starting, shots ringing out. But I want to back up all the way to putting people in the freezer and putting the lock on, not wanting to kill them at that point. But the damage has been done because Ralph has already pulled up his mask. So he's already identifiable. And then if, in fact, so let's say at that point, he's like, okay, Mary's identified me, but we're not going to kill anybody. You're right. A robbery is different than murder. We'll leave it be. But then at the very moment in which the door closes behind the mailman, Ralph then reopens the door to pull in the mailman who probably couldn't identify a person he saw for a second, Jackson, and put him into the freezer, that escalates the entire situation. You know what's going to happen next. You don't pull in kind of someone who can't identify, just a third party, right? Because Mary is different. Mary worked with Ralph. I can imagine at least the conversation, we need to kill witnesses. But the mailman, when you're pulling him in, you know that escalates the situation, especially if you're a career criminal like Jackson is. That it's almost like, what did you expect? If he's pulling him in, if you really didn't want to be part of what was about to happen next, you should have started running. I don't know. I feel like murder was part of this whole thing, like, obviously, for a very long time, especially when the mailman was pulled in. And it's surprising to me that it would be the bumbling robber who pulled up his mask, didn't even know well enough to keep his face covered, to be the one to think far enough ahead that the mailman was going to be the one to cause their downfall.
There are a couple things about this story that don't ring true. That's one of them. And I feel like Jackson's testimony is pretty typical of a lot of the evidence in this case. When you first hear it, it seems very clear, very straightforward, and very damning for Ralph. Tells a story of a robbery. It sounds like every other robbery you've ever heard. It kind of goes wrong. People get shot. They run off. They get caught. Ralph's the one who did the shooting, is the story. But then you listen, when you really look at it, it really doesn't make any sense that Ralph would do this. It's possible that Ralph really is just freaking out. He is not thinking, and he is doing something just completely out of fear and terror and everything else. However, he doesn't just sort of... Remember, he's never committed a crime before. He's never shot anyone before. If we're to believe the story, essentially, he not only, opened up the freezer door and started shooting at people, he walked up to people and shot them point blank in the head a couple times. I mean, these are...
Shooting execution style is very different. I mean, we've talked about this on our other podcast, Legal Briefs, with the Idaho quadruple murders, when people are like, why didn't the murderer just kill the fifth person who was a witness to it all? We've talked about this, especially if you haven't killed before. It is not just a mindless, okay, what's one more person to kill, especially when people start running and are conscious and are pleading for their lives, and you start having to hunt them down. The mailman, he had to hunt him down. He had to run after him, execution style kill him. I think shoot him more than one time. That is a very different killing style than shooting blankly into a freezer room where bullets are ricocheting and happen to hit their victims. The hunting aspect takes a different kind of mindset for even someone who sets out to kill.
And it's interesting. It is certainly the case that people kill people the first time they commit a crime. That happens. And you see that. So we're not saying that never happens. But it is a little bit harder to believe that Ralph, of the two of them, the guy who's never committed a crime, who's never committed a robbery, is nevertheless the one doing all this shooting. And really just deciding in a very cold-blooded manner he's going to murder these people. There's a reason that if you get convicted something like this, you end up on death row or in life without parole, as opposed to some sort of... a lot of times when people are shot during a robbery, it actually does not end up as first-degree murder. A lot of times people get 15 or 20 years, but they actually end up getting out. And honestly, if you get 15 or 20 years in state custody, you might serve 5. This, though, becomes much worse because of the premeditated nature of it. And you have to believe that Ralph, who up until this point in his life, he's 19 years old, has been a choir boy, nevertheless is not only committing an armed robbery, but shooting people with the intention to kill them.
And there's a really big switch that happens that even Jackson can't explain. So remember, after the mask incident, it was Ralph, according to Jackson, who wanted to kill all the witnesses, so kill 4 people. He agrees then not to kill anybody. But then what happens with the switch with a mailman? That is unexplainable. Of course, people can flip a switch, but usually people don't flip a switch to then want to kill multiple people. It sounds like the intention was to kill all 5 of them. And that is a leap of logic that is unexplainable by Jackson's testimony.
And as you've pointed out, the mailman doesn't really add much. If you've already agreed, I'm not going to kill Mary, even though she knows me and she saw my face, adding the mailman to the equation really should not lead you to kill him.
Maybe if it were switched, I could see that. If it were first the mailman who saw them, and he's like, look, man, he's going to forget. It doesn't matter how many, men of our stature that he could describe. He's not going to be able to name us. And then Mary walks in and sees their faces. Then I could see the reasoning switch where, oh, Mary knows exactly who I am. She doesn't have to pick me out of a lineup. She worked with me for however many months. She can absolutely identify me. That would make sense. But the inverse happened here. Now, okay, so we have this scene where Jackson's in the car. He's about to skid away, and Ralph jumps into the car, and they start driving away, and there's just like F-bombs flying everywhere. Why did you do this? Jackson then described how they drove to the house of Eric Burley, one of their friends. They continued arguing in front of Burley about what had just happened at Smokin' Joe's, and Burley actually becomes something of a judge during this argument, trying to mediate between them. Ralph gave Burley the gun that he supposedly used to kill all these victims and both of their clothes and ski masks and told Burley to get rid of them. Afterwards, we've already talked about this, but Ralph and Jackson went to the barber. Now, though Burley went to a bar to grab drinks, he didn't go to the barber, and then to Jackson's house where Stokes had forgotten his wallet.
You may recall the whole wallet thing becomes important later on, because Jackson has the wallet. I think this is sort of his explanation for how he ended up with the wallet is, he forgets it. We're going to talk a lot about Eric Burley as we continue with this. It's probably already striking some of you as strange that they've just committed this murder where they've killed 3 people to avoid getting caught because they don't want anyone to know they did it. And then the first thing they do is they go over to some random guy's house and start talking about the robbery they just committed. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to get into that. But Burley is a very important witness. He's a very important person in this. And once again, this is one of those things, if you're sitting out there in the world, you probably can't imagine doing this. It's actually kind of surprising how often people will murder people and then just randomly tell third parties. And that's how they end up getting in trouble, is because they just randomly told somebody or randomly brought someone along. The number of times where 2 people decide to kill a third person and then bring someone else along, it's just like, why did you do that? But people do it. But if it's striking you as weird, I think it should.
And along the weirdness, to not only speak, you can imagine they're in the heat of the moment, they're debating, they're really angry at each other about what's just happened, but then to give the gun and their clothes that would be identifying them to this third person to entrust him to get rid of it is also very interesting. Like if it were me, and this happens a lot actually in these car chases with law enforcement, is you'll see like clothes and guns flying out the window. That happens all the time. Actually, the number of body cams I've watched with like guns flying out the window, and then when you finally catch up to them and they're like, I didn't have a gun. It's like, sir, I saw you throw the gun out of the window. He's like, what gun? Like it happens a lot. So, these are very important pieces of evidence, obviously. And they're giving it to Burley to get rid of, instead of getting rid of it themselves. They could have easily done it. They could have dumped it, in a dumpster on their way to the barber. No cops are on their tail as of yet. When Jackson heard that the police were after him, he fled from Philadelphia, so he runs. But after a couple of weeks, he realized that he really couldn't outrun them. So that's when Jackson comes back and turns himself into the cops. On cross-examination, the defense counsel brought out that Jackson and Stokes had only met a week and a half before the robbery. So this is not some like long-standing friendship as we've talked about. Defense counsel questioning leads to an interesting sidebar where the prosecutor warns the defense counsel that he may open the door to the reason that Stokes and Jackson got together. Stokes had a plan for another robbery and knew that Jackson was the guy to talk about such a thing. Defense counsel acts accordingly, and this does not come out in testimony. Okay, let's talk really quick about that tactic right there. We've talked about 404B, Rule of Evidence 404B, how you can't talk about other bad acts that have nothing to do with the bad act that you're on trial for. So this is a huge piece of evidence, right? That Stokes was already planning another robbery because, of course, if you're planning another robbery, it's more believable maybe that you'd plan the instant robbery, and that he was bringing in Jackson, who is the prosecution's main witness here. But absent opening the door from the defense, prosecution cannot bring in this fact because that other robbery, even his affiliation with Jackson in the planning of the other robbery, had nothing to do with Smokin' Joe's robbery. And so that's why the prosecution warned the defense counsel, wait a second, Do you really want to talk about how they met? Because once the defense opens the door, he can ask, how did you meet? And if the answer to that is, well, we were planning another robbery, then it's fair game to come out. And so that piece of evidence didn't come out because the defense counsel was properly warned and then did not open the door to that realm of questioning.
And you can say whatever you want to about the prosecution and the prosecutor in this case, and they get criticized for a lot of reasons, but this is absolutely the proper way to handle this. Mm-hmm. When something like this is about to happen, you stop and you make sure that the defense counsel knows what they're doing, that they're about to open that door. Do they really want to do it? Do that for a couple reasons. Number one, I think it's fair. Number two, this almost certainly had been dealt with in some sort of pretrial motion where it was determined this was not coming in. As Alice said, this is clearly 404 evidence. There may be reasons that you could point to. I think probably this is pretty weak evidence. They probably only had Donald Jackson saying that this is how they met, that Ralph looked him up because he had another robbery he wanted to commit before they committed this one. And the judge probably said, look, that is really prejudicial. And even if there are some legitimate 404B reasons that should come in, I'm not going to let that in. That can't come in. But as Alice said, when you start pointing out, well, y'all barely knew each other. You barely knew each other, and yet you're saying he came to you to talk about this robbery. If the reason you met was because he had come to him for another robbery, supports the theory that we said before, that the reason he sought him out is because he knew, if you need a plumber, you go find a professional. And if you need to commit a robbery, you go find somebody who knows how to rob things, right? And that's kind of what they're saying he did. So this is absolutely proper. The defense counsel recognizes he's probably got as much out of it as he's going to get anyway. No reason to press the point. He backs off. Door doesn't come open. And this evidence never comes in.
And you be the defense counsel for a second and weigh whether it's worth pointing out that they only knew each other very recently, because you have other evidence pointing to the fact that they at least knew each other well enough to be put into the same location, right? The wallet, being at the barber together, having witnesses see them together. So they're clearly not 100% strangers to each other. So how much do you get out of the fact that they recently met if along with that fact you get that they were planning another robbery together? Because that's so prejudicial. I mean, honestly, if that came in, you probably automatically lose the case.
And then if you're the prosecution, what are you concerned about? You're concerned, wow, we got this great jury verdict.
Mistrial.
But yeah, if it's not a mistrial, it's an appeal, and it's going to be ineffective assistance of counsel because your lawyer was an idiot and did this really dumb thing that he shouldn't have done. And that's one reason that you sometimes will see prosecutors, they're protecting their own record.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly right, Brett. For those of you out there saying, why would the prosecution be helping the defense not open that door? That's exactly why. It's really, I see it as the prosecutor's job to protect your record, because the appeal is going to come from the defense, and you want this to be the strongest record ever, especially if there was a motion in limine or some sort of, ruling ahead of time where the judge already said this is super prejudicial. It's not going to look great then if you have a conviction after that very prejudicial information comes before the jury.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Alice, you know how it is. When you're at your best, you can do anything, but sometimes life gets you bogged down, and this is the time of year where a lot of people are feeling down, they're feeling low, they're coming off the high of the holidays, and a lot of times just talking to someone can help. And that's where working with a therapist and where BetterHelp can come in to get you closer to the best version of you. If you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, flexible, affordable, and entirely online. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist anytime for no additional charge.
Brett, BetterHelp is just so wonderful because you don't need to just be seeking out their help for, once you've experienced something traumatic. Of course, that's something you can seek them out for, but they can also help you learn positive coping skills or how to set boundaries. And I know all of us can, benefit from setting better boundaries. So if you want to live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/prosecutors today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/prosecutors. The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Alice, we're back with one of our favorite sponsors, HelloFresh. You remember all those New Year's goals you promised yourself you'd stick to? HelloFresh is here to help you eat better by delivering fresh ingredients and easy recipes right to your door, taking the hassle out of dinner time. You can get HelloFresh and skip that extra trip to the grocery store and the long checkout lines. Spend more time doing the things you love with delicious, chef-crafted recipes delivered to your doorstep. And no matter your lifestyle or meal preference, HelloFresh has recipes sure to please everyone at your table. From fit and wholesome to veggie or family friendly, you'll always find something even the pickiest eaters will enjoy.
I know you guys are always hearing me say how much time HelloFresh saves me, but it really does. Working as a full-time lawyer, being full-time moms, and having 2 podcasts is a lot of work. But with HelloFresh, I can make a delicious meal in under 30 minutes for my family. We just made these pork taquitos, which the kids went crazy for. It was absolutely delicious, and I am always so excited to see what HelloFresh has in store for our family. Go to HelloFresh.com/TP65 and use code TP65 for 65% off plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com/TP65 and use code TP65 for 65% off plus free shipping. And find out for yourself why it's America's #1 meal kit.
Obviously, this is a big deal. This is really important testimony. At this point, he is now off the stand, and the prosecution is moving on. And this is an interesting case because it has all sorts of evidence. Obviously, you have eyewitnesses. You also have a lot of circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's building both at the same time. At this point, they put on a detective who's going to talk about some keys. Now, these keys fit the cash register at Smoking Joe's. So obviously, they're really important, and it's really important where you found them. It turns out that Leonard Wells, who is Eric Burley's brother, found the keys along with a box of coins in the basement of his home. So essentially, what the prosecution presents here is they went to Eric Burley's home, they split up the cash. In the process of collecting the cash register, they also got a whole bunch of coins. So they split up the cash, the coins remained in the box. And in addition to those, there are the keys. And this is consistent with the story that Jackson told, though of course he could have made up the part about Stokes. This clearly shows you that whoever robbed Smoking Joe's was at Burley's house that day. There's no question about that. Once again, the question is, was Ralph there? But you've got Wells, and Wells is going to testify. So basically the detective, he gets on the stand, he says the keys fit. Then you put Wells on the stand, and Wells testifies that he saw Ralph and Donald Jackson that day. That both of them had been to his home while he was there, the day of the murders, and he knew that they had been in his basement with his brother. Wells also testified that both Ralph and Jackson had guns, and he saw those guns because they were on their hips at the time. And I guess you can sort of imagine them in some sort of holster, maybe, or maybe they just slipped them in the waistband of their pants. But either way, Wells saw these guns. And Wells would testify that Ralph had a revolver. This is important because the murders were believed to have been committed by someone who had a revolver. You might wonder, how did they know that? How would they know it was a revolver as opposed to some other kind of weapon? Well, One of the reasons is they found no shell casings at the scene of the crime. Obviously, it's possible somebody picked up the shell casings, but with the description of what happened from both the people who survived and from Jackson, it was a very chaotic thing after the shooting. At some point, the gun jams, the people are running. Unlikely that they spent time picking up shells. For those of you who don't know how guns work, and I know there's some of you guys out there, so if you have a semi-automatic pistol, basically the bullets are in a magazine that some people call it a clip, a magazine that you put in the bottom of the gun. So the handle of the gun, where you're holding the gun, the bullets go from that magazine into the gun. The way a semi-automatic works is every time you fire a shot, the force of the shot being fired brings another round from the magazine into the chamber where it is now ready to fire as soon as you pull the trigger. So that each time you pull the trigger, you are firing a shot until there are no more bullets in the gun. One of the things that happens when you fire that shot is, in addition to bringing another bullet up, the casing of the bullet is ejected from the gun. So if you've ever fired a semi-automatic, you know as you're shooting, what remains of the cartridge is flying out and being left behind. Good etiquette to go ahead and pick those up. But in any event, probably not something you would do if you're in the middle of a murder. So the fact that they did not find those meant probably not a semi-automatic. How does a revolver work? Revolvers are different. The magazine for a revolver is actually that sort of cylinder in the middle of a revolver. If you've ever seen a cowboy movie, y'all know what I'm talking about. Have you ever seen...
Spin the revolver.
Exactly. All the times Alice has played Russian roulette, she knows all about this. Spin the cylinder. You put one bullet in, you spin the cylinder, and then you take your chances. But anyway, so you put 6 bullets in usually. Though bigger revolvers can have a few more. You put your 6 bullets in. When you pull the trigger, it fires the bullet, and the cylinder spins. So it goes to the next bullet, and you fire it. And then once you've fired all your shots, you open the cylinder. All the shells are still in the cylinder, and you have to remove the shells before you can reload it. So the theory here for the police was nobody took the time to pick up the shells. So this must have been a revolver, and the shells were still in the gun when they left, and that's why we don't see them at the crime scene. So the fact now that you have Wells saying, and you also had Jackson say this as well, that Ralph was armed with a revolver points to Ralph. And you might be saying, well, what about Jackson? Maybe Jackson had a revolver. Well, Wells takes care of that as well. He says that Jackson's gun, he describes it as the way I described it, that the bullets went into the handle of the gun, which means it's a semi-automatic, which means if he had fired his gun, there would have been a shell casing left behind. Now, in cross-examination, the defense basically says, look, everything Wells is saying is protecting someone else, his brother, Eric, who, by the way, was friends with Jackson and had known Jackson for much longer than Ralph. As I said, we're going to talk a lot about Eric as we continue through this, but this is the storyline that starts to develop about what exactly is going on here. And, the defense's theory is Jackson is lying. Why is Jackson lying? What is he lying about? That's where Eric's really going to play a big role as you start to dive deeper into the case.
And this all makes a lot of sense because remember, it's Jackson who's driving the car. So it would make sense that Jackson would drive to his friend's house rather than someone that Ralph knew very well. But also notice how we're beginning to understand the investigation. It's not that they definitively know it's a revolver, but really the lack of these casings that's leading them to believe it. And then we always run into this situation when there are murders and there are multiple perpetrators with guns who actually shot in order to make the killing. And here it's like this very definitive line because of the semi-automatic weapon and the revolver, which is just convenient as a factual matter. Like it would be great if all our cases came this cleanly, but you're beginning to see how this testimony is very purposeful. It's not just a throwaway that one of them has a semi-automatic and one of them has a revolver. It's creating a story around how Ralph is the only one who could have been the one to kill. Jackson said that he had a Colt automatic. So that confirms what Wells testified to the type of gun that Jackson had. And he said that Stokes was the one who had a revolver. Now, both were .38 caliber, but they took slightly different ammunition based on the type of gun that they were. An expert did testify at trial that the ammunition found at Stokes' home would fit a revolver, but not a semi-automatic. Furthermore, there were no shell casings, like Brett just mentioned, found at the restaurant. Of course, it could have been that the shooter collected all the casings, but by the way, even in situations where it's not as emergent as the one described by Jackson here, it's really hard to find all the casings. Even if it's in a small space like a freezer, there's bodies, there's blood. There's no like trajectory. These casings kind of fall. It's not like a perfect arc that they all fall into a perfect little pile next to your feet so you can bend down and pick them up. They kind of fly everywhere, especially if you have a moving target and you are running yourself. So it's possible to leave behind casings, and oftentimes at crime scenes we see this, even if there's only one casing left. It's usually not because they've been collected by the shooter. It's usually because it's hard to find them because they're in the grass, they roll away, etc. So the absence of casings only tells you so much here. So one of the possibilities is that there were no casings, which would point to a revolver. Now, the .38 caliber shell casings found underneath Ralph's bed was at his home. A ballistics expert testified that the rifling on the bullet in Mary was consistent with a revolver and not a semi-automatic. The same was true of all the rounds fired that day, save for one that was too damaged to be readily identifiable.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
You see that where, bullets deform as soon as they hit something.
You can tell it probably at a freezer, too. It's probably like stainless steel, which is obviously a very hard material, could ruin the bullet.
And they can do a lot nowadays with computer technology, sort of reconstructing what a bullet would have looked like. But in 1980, this was all done under a microscope, and you get a bullet that's smashed to pieces. You're not going to be able to do much with it. I think, this is sort of an example of circumstantial evidence. It is likely that bullet is the exact same type of bullet as all the rest of them, given that they didn't find any different. Shell casings underneath Ralph's bed, another piece of circumstantial evidence, because the theory is he took that revolver home and he emptied out the casings in his room, and those are the casings from the bullets that were fired into Mary. Obviously, there are other potential explanations for that. You're not going to convict a man based on that, but they are .38s. People were killed with .38, probably killed with a revolver, so it fits. And this is just another one of those bricks that the prosecution's using to build their case.
As we're picking this apart right now, one thing that is very interesting to me is that these casings that the prosecution say point to Ralph were found in his bedroom. But based on Jackson's testimony, in the heat of this argument, Stokes hands his revolver to Burley to get rid of. He didn't mention anything about emptying out the revolver. And why would he empty out the casings to bring home and keep to be found tied to his own belongings when the whole point of handing over the gun to Burley was for Burley to get rid of the evidence? You would think keep the casings in the gun, whatever. It doesn't matter. If the casings are in the gun, you don't have two separate pieces of evidence in separate places that can tie to you. They're all in one. And presumably you're trusting Burley to get rid of the evidence, which includes the casings. So that part doesn't really make sense. Okay, maybe Jackson didn't see Stokes empty out the casings. But again, this not hardened criminal, why would he think to do that? He knew enough to get rid of his clothes and his gun. Why would he keep the casings and then not just keep them, but put them under his bed of all places? Why not put them under someone else's bed?
And this is an excellent point that Alice is making, and it is an example of, once again, when you look at this surface level, everything seems to make sense. Oh, he used a .38. Well, there's the shell casings. There's where the casings were. Couldn't find them at the murder. There they are. But once again, you're supposed to believe Jackson. Jackson has told us a story that essentially is they commit the robbery, they drive back, they take everything to Burley's house, they give the guns to Burley to get rid of, and then they go off and get their hair cut, and that's it. When exactly was their time for him to take the gun home? And as Alice said, why do you want to keep the casing? What was the point of ejecting the casings at that point? I think at best, all you can say from these is maybe he had a .38. That's really the best you can say. I don't think these casings were related to the crime at all, which is a significantly weaker. The .38 caliber handgun is not exactly rare, and a .38 caliber revolver is not exactly rare. And we're going to find out later on that his dad will say he actually owned a weapon just like that.
And some of you may be thinking, well, then why did he have these casings under his bed? Here is a good reason someone would have casings. You have a box of ammunition, and as you're shooting, say in your backyard, where you probably shouldn't shoot, by the way, but say you're shooting cans in your backyard and you come and change out the ammunition, you have to empty out the casings to put in new ammunition. Where are you going to throw all those casings just back in the box? Because those of you who may be thinking, there's no, why the heck would you have casings otherwise? That actually sounds a lot more reasonable to me, why they would be in a box than you removed them from the murder weapon that you're going to get rid of to bring home as a trophy.
course, Alice knows good and well that in Alabama and Texas, shooting in your backyard is what you do on a regular basis. So.
It depends what backyard you live in. If you live in West Palm Beach, do not shoot in your backyard.
Right. Or Philadelphia, for that matter. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, feel free.
If you live nowhere and it's your domain and you live on acres, that's fine.
Yeah. Just, have something behind the whatever you're shooting at to collect the bullets. So you're not firing off into the woods. Some poor, unassuming bird watcher starts seeing trees explode next to them as the bullets hit the trees. So that's the situation with the guns. Seems big deal at first, but maybe not so much. Well, Eric Burley's also going to testify. And Eric Burley is going to further sort of add both to the strength of the prosecution's case, but also build some weaknesses into it as well. He is going to testify that about 3:30 on the day of the murders, Ralph and Donald Jackson, they show up at his house carrying what he described as a Santa Claus-like bag. One of them has it slung over their back. And they go into the basement, and when they drop the bag, money spills out. There's also some papers that slip out, and he sees the name Smokin' Joe's written on those papers. Ralph, at this point, has a revolver. He gives that revolver to Burley. Jackson, at this point, tells him that Ralph had just killed some people with it, and that he needs to get rid of the gun for them. Burley, I guess being the good friend that he is, takes the gun and says he walks around Philadelphia looking for somewhere to get rid of it. He sees a rock. He picks up the rock. He digs a hole under the rock. He puts the gun there, buries it, and puts the rock back. The police will actually go and look for this gun, and they will find the supposed rock where he buried it. But once they dig up underneath the rock, there is no gun. So what exactly ended up happening to the revolver, nobody really knows. Now, Burley was good friends with Jackson. He saw Jackson a lot, and Jackson was usually carrying a firearm. And every time he saw Jackson, Jackson had a semi-automatic, which is consistent with the testimony we've heard about him having a Colt. Burley said he'd never been to Smokin' Joe's, didn't know anything about Smokin' Joe's, didn't even know where it was, which is further effort by the police to sort of confirm that this couldn't have been Burley, because how would he ever have even found Smokin' Joe's? Now, on cross-examination, the defense is going to attack some of this. They note, for instance, that Burley, in his initial statement to the police, says when he first sees these two men, they're wearing street clothes, which is actually inconsistent because supposedly they were wearing jumpsuits. And it's a little unclear when exactly they would have changed clothes if what Burley is saying is true. And during the closing argument the defense makes, they will point out something that's pretty interesting. And that's that Burley looks a lot like Ralph.
How interesting. Back up real quick and just think about all of the evidence so far. All the testimony, including Burley himself, puts him at the scene right after the crime. Money is found there. The keys from Smokin' Joe's are found there. So the fruits of the crime are clearly at Burley's house. And Burley knows a lot about what happened. So he himself puts himself squarely into the aftermath of the crime. Obviously, in Jackson and Burley's testimony, he's just an innocent bystander who helps out a friend. Just let this start percolating in your mind about what this could mean. And remember, we've always said this, that it's really hard for people to tell lies that are made up whole cloth. Oftentimes, there's a lot of elements of truth mixed in, and it's kind of shaping what the truth is because you recognize that it would be impossible to leave out elements of the truth, so you have to fold them into your lie. Or you know enough about something that you can tell a feasible story, but not all the elements that you're telling are true. So just know, I mean, Burley is like very included in this murder robbery, whether he is a innocent bystander or not.
It is certainly very interesting that it seems like there is more evidence of the robbery at Burley's house than there is at Ralph's house. And this is a really important point that Alice is making. And if you think back to the Katie Autry case, we talked about Stephen Souls, who most likely was the person who was solely responsible for that crime. But while he's talking to the police, he is implicating someone else. Stephen, when he's talking to the police, he's looking for a way out. So what does he do? He points to Luke Goodrum and says he was involved. And some people have said, well, why would he pick Luke? And that's a great question. He did not just pick a name out of thin air. He picked someone who was tangentially related to the events that night, someone that he had seen that night, someone that he knew had actually committed another crime that night, someone he knew was at the party that Katie was at. There was a reason he picked him. And as we continue to look at this, the point that Alice is making is the point that, as we've said, you look at this case, it feels like, man, this is bad for Ralph. Ralph is not looking good. Seems like Ralph probably did this. And it just feels like the mountain of evidence is piling up, and it's piling up higher and higher and higher. But then, the more you look at it, the more you start to wonder about some things and how they fit into this story that don't seem to make sense. And as we continue to talk about this case, we're going to talk about that a lot. I think we're about to wrap up. Let's go ahead and talk about Ralph Stokes, Sr., who's Ralph's dad, and what he has to say about this day.
Yeah, so Ralph's dad takes the stand. We've, in past episodes, have talked about, as the prosecution or just as an attorney, it's definitely a strategy call whether to call someone's parent, because there's no privilege when it comes to parents. You don't get this like special parent privilege. There is obviously marital privilege, attorney-client privilege, but actually people are often surprised when they realize there's no parental or child privilege. And so you do have to testify if called to court. But we have also told you that parents tend to protect their kids. And even when they are under oath and someone who is like, serves at church every Sunday, they are bound to lie if it helps their child. I think it's just an evolutionary thing. So strategically, it's a big deal, I would say, that Ralph Stokes Sr. takes the stand. But he does. And he testified that Ralph had been home all morning. He'd only left when his mother sent him to the store, and then he was only gone for about 10 minutes and came right back home. He then ate lunch with the entire family, including his father, his mother, and his sister. At around 2 p.m., so this is well after the robbery, Ralph was sent to the store again, and this time he was gone for just 5 minutes. Other than that, Ralph Stokes Sr. testified that Ralph was there the entire day. That's his alibi. Now, you may say that's very powerful information, but on cross-examination, Ralph Sr. also admits that he never told the police that Ralph Jr. was with him that day, even when Ralph Jr. was arrested on 3 counts of murder. And Ralph Sr. also testified that even after the police executed a search warrant at the house, he never had a conversation with his son about why the police were there and why he was getting arrested.
And you have this, and you'll hear a lot of people who talk about this case will say Ralph couldn't have done it because he had an ironclad alibi for that day. And the problem is, yes, you have Ralph saying my son was with me, and that's great. And his mom's going to say the same thing. She also testifies. All these people are testifying for the defense. We're on the defense case at this point. They're all testifying for the defense. Ralph's mom's going to say the exact same thing happened. But cross-examination is pretty easy on these points. Number one, you love your son. You do anything for your son. Oh, by the way, you never mentioned this to the police, did you? When the police showed up to arrest your son, did you cry out, he can't have done it, he's innocent, he was with me the whole day? No, you didn't. And that is the kind of thing that makes the jury think, we can't buy this. Why would you wait till trial?
Yeah, why would you wait till trial to say this very important thing? Especially when, we have already in the record so far that the news coverage was that day, right? You knew generally the time, you knew the day of the murder, certainly. And if you know generally what's happening and your son gets arrested, you don't think you'd cry out and say, wait, please, you have the wrong guy. We hear that a lot. We hear that on body cams all the time. It couldn't have been him. He's been here with me all day. Those are kind of spontaneous outbursts. Why would you save this for a Perry Mason moment at trial? You wouldn't, is the point that the cross-examination is trying to make here.
And remember, this wasn't a case they investigated for months. They were on top of Ralph the next day. They were executing that warrant the next day. So it should have been the kind of thing that you would say something about. Talk about one more witness and then wrap it up for today, and that's Michelle Daniels. Michelle was called by the defense in an attempt to bolster this alibi. And she said that she saw Ralph that day going to run these errands for his mom, that she had spoken to Ralph, and Ralph was like, yeah, I got to go to the store for my mom. And this was consistent with that story that his father had told, and it was consistent with the story that the mother told. And you might think this is really good evidence, but on cross-examination, the prosecution does a really good job. They ask her if she knew that this happened on the same day as the murder. She says she did know that because she had seen a report on the news that night about Ralph being involved in the crime, and she knew it couldn't have been him because she had seen Ralph that day. The problem with this is the news would not have reported Ralph's involvement until days later, which means she probably saw him on a different day. This is incredibly damaging to the defense because not only does it undermine the story she told, it undermines the story of both the mother and the father, because it is probably true that there was a day where Ralph was there the whole day and they sent him on errands and it was the same day that Michelle saw him and that was not the day of the crime. So this really undercuts that alibi defense that is the heart of Ralph's defense really in this case. Now, we are going to continue to talk about this case next time, and we're going to start to tell you some things that mountain of evidence that start to undercut it. And if you are absolutely convinced of Ralph's involvement in this crime at this point, I would just ask you to keep an open mind for at least one more episode, because we are really going to drill into this. We're going to talk a lot more about Eric Burley. We're going to talk about those shoes. Remember those shoes that were found? That seems so important because they seem to have the same stains as from the murder. We're going to talk about those shoes and tell you a little bit more about those. And by the end of our presentation, I think we're going to end up doing a better job than the defense did of undermining this murder. Doesn't mean Ralph's not involved. You may still conclude at the end that he is, and that in fact he is the shooter, but I will be interested to see that. Well, Alice, I've enjoyed recording with you in a studio.
Oh my gosh, guys. I was going to say the bongos are coming back out. Can I just say the amount of restraint Brett's shown this entire hour is I'm letting him do this. This is like my child when they've like held it together. I'm like, fine, scream out the window, blow that whistle, whatever you want to do. Because he has held his hands above the bongos repeatedly for like the last hour, and like a child has pulled his hand back. So bongo away, Brett.
I feel like I'm Guster all of a sudden.
Guster. Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about Guster since like high school.
Yeah, there you go. Shout out to the 90s.
Oh,
well,
geez.
guys, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. We're really interested to hear what you think about this case so far. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Look us up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at prosecutorspod. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry you don't have video of me playing the bongos. Real missed opportunity there.
One second. Let me pull out my phone and get a video of this because this is outrageous. You can't even hear me because there's a lot. Okay, bongo away. Go, bongo, bongo. Y'all are going to see this on Twitter. This is ridiculous and impossible to do a podcast on.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
But I held it together to this point. And, join us on Patreon, where maybe I'll just play bongos for all our patrons as a weekly event.
Is that an ad for Patreon or what?
That'll be the if you pay the $20 level, you get free bongo concerts from me.
Oh, gosh. I think I'd go for the Matthew McConaughey naked bongos. But this is what you get today, guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've probably done enough. Maybe. It's hard to say. But I guess we will go ahead and sign off for today. But we'll be back next week for more on Ralph Stokes. But until then, I'm Brett.
I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. How was that? Was that good, Alice?
That was really good, except that you moved a lot, so I could hear squeaking in your.
Should I do it again?
No, I'm messing with you. I'm totally messing with you. I am 100% messing with you.
I'm sorry, because I totally stole all of your discussion about revolvers and automatics in the next one.
You just love guns.
I do
It's
love
okay.
guns.
It's okay. That's
People have said
fantastic. I'll just say some of it. It's fine. Okay, so to go a little bit more into those guns. over the bongos. We're like, don't do it. It was like literally watching my toddler be like, don't touch the fire.
Yeah.
Don't touch the fire.
It's so tempting. I'm very glad I didn't take the full
Thank
drum
you.
over there.
That was super fun.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.